On the debate tonight, February 26, 2019, India sent out a strong message to Pakistan. In the pre-dawn hours, Indian Air Force jets flew beyond the line of control to carry out a historic counter-terror preemptive strike. Within hours, the Ministry of External Affairs confirmed that 100% of the target was achieved and a large number of terrorists neutralized.
In this operation, a very large number of Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists, trainers, senior commanders, and groups of jihadis who were being trained for Fidaiin action were eliminated.
In less than a week, the triumph of India's forces was marred by parties politicking in election season.
जिस तरह का प्रमाण अमेरिका की सरकार ने उसामा बिन लादेन के बारे में पूरे विश्व को दिया, उस तरह का प्रमाण हमको भी देना चाहिए.
The opposition demanded proof. The BJP was charged with using airstrikes as a poll prop. Though the Ministry of External Affairs is yet to formally announce the number of terrorists neutralized by the airstrike, BJP party president Amit Shah stoked controversy when he claimed that the airstrike killed 250 terrorists.
परंतु मित्रों, नरेंद्र मोदी सरकारे बरोबर 13 દિવસે એર સ્ટ્રાઇક કરી 250 થી વધારે આતંકવાદીઓને શોધ.
As the political slugfest snowballed, union ministers including Ravi Shankar Prasad and Minister of State for External Affairs and former Army Chief V.K. Singh stepped in.
कभी भी जब ऐसा हमला होता है, there are no one who is a witness present on ground.
सेनाकारी सरकार बताएगी, तो अध्यक्ष जी ने भी कहा होगा, एस्टिमेशन से कहा होगा, संख्या इससे आगे भी हो सकती है.
Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman also maintained that the government of India's position on the casualties is limited to what the Foreign Secretary declared.
The Foreign Secretary gave a figure. He didn't give a figure, he gave a statement. That is Government of India's position.
Mirror now asks, are our NETAS discrediting our forces? Should politicians take credit for the work of the forces? Should airstrikes be used in political rallies? Should the government be asked to provide proof? Is questioning the government unpatriotic? Let's debate.
Now that the conflict is over, obviously there's going to be a meal made of it. Politically, on both sides of the aisle, members of the government or members of the ruling party who've gone on and announced numbers like 250, 300, and in one case, Yogi Adityanath said 400 have been killed. On being asked, the opposition then demands evidence of any sort of success. Are these politicians basically discrediting our forces, dragging our forces into their political questions? Should they stay out of it? Given also, more importantly, that these are questions of national security and these are sensitive matters of international affairs. I couldn't have had a more brilliant panel put together this evening. And like we have been doing on this channel over the last several days, we are going to simply listen while the people who truly understand this issue tell us like it is. On the show with me this evening, 3 former chiefs of the Army, the Air Force and the Navy. Air Chief Marshal Fali Major was the 21st Chief of the Air Staff of the Indian Air Force, former member of the National Security Advisory Board. He was chief during the 26/11 attacks on Mumbai. General V.P. Malik, the 9th Chief of the Army Staff of the Indian Army. He served as Army Chief and Chairperson, Chief of Staff Committee during the Kargil War. He coordinated and planned and executed the Operation Vijay to defeat Pakistan's attempt to intrusion in Kargil. Navy Chief Admiral Sushil Kumar served as the chief during the Kargil War and was the joint in charge while the attack on Parliament happened in 2001. Gentlemen, good evening to each of you, and I thank you each for your time. I want to start with General VP Malik. General Malik, there has been a lot of crosstalk among our politicians about what has happened, about the numbers that have been released. There are politicians announcing numbers. 250, 300, 400 people have died. Is it the place for a politician at a political election rally to be talking about matters like this and announcing unofficial numbers, in your opinion?
Faye, I'm afraid I couldn't hear you properly. The voice is so muffled that one cannot hear properly.
Well, let me attempt to ask the question again. Do you believe that politicians are discrediting our forces with the questions that they are asking right now, General Malik?
Look, the problem is that we have got elections coming very soon. And there are some questions which may be appropriate, but there are quite a few inappropriate questions and untimely also. Now, we carried out this strike and the results cannot be so evident within a few hours. The fact is that there was a target given to the Air Force. They struck it and they have verified that they have struck the target. They have caused the damage. Now, who is going to count the number of casualties? I don't know. The Air Force cannot. The Indian government cannot. So we have to take some time to get the ground data of whatever information that we can collect from the ground. But why this fight is going on, I'm so glad the right answer has been given by the Chief of Air Staff himself, Air Chief Marshal Dhanoa. And I don't think the Indian Armed Forces would want to get involved in this whole issue, which is more of an electoral issue and not doubting the credibility of the armed forces.
Well, General Malik, the other question that does arise is that when politicians announce these numbers, and you did say at election rallies because there's an election coming up, but they turn around and say, when you ask me for proof, you are questioning the forces themselves. Is there a need right now to separate politics from the forces completely?
No, the point is that after all, the military is an instrument of the politics. And as far as I'm concerned, I would also like the public, including the politicians, to take interest in national security and to be aware of national security. But I'm talking of the time because of the elections coming, so these questions which are being asked, sometimes when you start doubting the success of the military, what they have achieved, and you start casting aspersions on that, now that I think is unfair. And that should not be done. That will embarrass that will also affect the morale of the armed forces.
Well, I do want to ask a question of Admiral Sushil Kumar. There has been a lot of bragging that has been done by members of government who said this is the first time the forces have been given a free hand in deciding retaliation. This is the first forces-friendly government where the forces are actually been given a free hand. Do you agree with that, or do you believe that this is the first time?
Well, Faye, you've got to look at this in a very overall perspective. There is a tactical responsibility and a strategic responsibility. The armed forces are given a mandate directly for a strategic responsibility. But on a tactical level, they are always at the border, in the air, on the ships, carrying out their tactical duties. So to say that they've been given a mandate to retaliate at will has to be seen in that context. You see, during the Kargil conflict, especially during short of war situations as we were at one stage, rules of engagement do apply. And when you say a free hand to retaliate, you cannot let the armed forces carry out an operation which would have international ramifications. Those are strategic operations for which you require a definite political mandate. The Balikot attack was a directive from the government. It was not a free hand to the military to strike anywhere and go anywhere or do what you will across the LOC. Even the surgical strike that we initially did with the army, that was a directive. So we have to be a little careful on this. There are tactical levels of response and strategic levels of response. In the Navy, we call it the rules of engagement. During the Kargil war, when we were at a precautionary stage of war, we had very specific rules of engagement.
Well, Admiral, do you believe, like General Malik just told us, there's obviously an election coming up. Do you believe if the election was not so close by, perhaps the nature of the battle or the nature of the talk that we're having in politics would be different? Or is this normally how politicians have always reacted?
Sorry, I missed that point. Kay, can you please repeat it? It's
a
little blurred.
I will. My question is, do you believe that the politics around this strike is because the election is coming up?
Well, you know, that is, I would say, a given. But we also have to bear in mind that the armed forces need to be left out of the political discourse. We are apolitical. Then that's the way it ought to be. We are not part of the political mainstream. And we are best when we operate apolitically. That is the way it's always been. That is our oath of allegiance. We serve the nation. In fact, the oath ingrained in us is the safety, honor, and welfare of the country come first, always and every time. And that is the way it ought to be. That is my personal view.
It's very well put. Air Chief Marshal Fali Major joins us as well. Air Marshal Major, went to the government after 26/11 and that story came out where you recommended airstrikes, much like the ones we saw carried out last week. At that time, you weren't given the go-ahead. Do you believe that the go-ahead that was given last week for last week's strike are an indication of this government's risk-taking ability or its political will?
Good evening, Faye. This question has been asked to me many times, and we must get one thing clear, that any time you have a conflict situation like the one we had in Mumbai, 26/11, or the Pulwama attack, or what we did just now, the armed forces are always asked for a military response. And what I had given then were the Air Force's options for a military response. As to why that was not accepted is best answered by the government and not me, because we don't ask them as to why we were not allowed to execute the task which we had suggested. So I will not be able to answer your question. But yes, coming and seeing what has happened on 26 February, it all boils down to the will of the government and also perhaps a better orientation about our intelligence that we have gathered or we have enhanced since 26/11 in the country. And for a strike like the one on 26th, unless you have impeccable intelligence, a strike of that nature would never have been possible. So perhaps these are some of the reasons why I think the strike was undertaken on 26th of February.
Well, I do understand that General Malik can hear us better. General Malik, the question, and this is a quote from one of the politicians that said the government waited until the 13th day and then killed 250 terrorists in response to Pulwama. Now, again, what I would like the audience to understand that a strike like this one involves strategy, planning, working out scenarios, a heavy reliance on intelligence. This is not revenge. And also, international law doesn't permit this sort of revenge. This was actually strategic. And a lot of the political talk right now is muddying the waters as far as that is concerned. Isn't that true, General Malik?
Yeah, that is true. Let's face it that this was a preemptive strike. It was a strategic mission deep inside Pakistan territory on a given target. And the job was I would say twofold. One was to show our capability that we can strike anywhere deep into Pakistan territory against these militant targets. That I thought was achieved very well. Now, second part, as far as the number of casualties inflicted, that slowly, gradually, these things will become apparent. But today, to start talking about it, discussing about it, and asking for exact figure is absolutely not correct. And yes, it was not a revenge, definitely not a revenge, but it was a preemptive strike, and I would say it was a reaction to what had taken place and the way our casualties were, the way Pulwama attack was done by Jaish-e-Mohammed. So it was, I would say, preemptive to tell the terrorist elements as well as to the Pakistan government whose strategic asset they are.
Absolutely, and in fact, I want to bring in Admiral Kumar. Admiral Kumar, if we consider right now international law specific to do with reprisal, the fact that this was preemptive, it was not revenge, that Pakistan had been informed about the terrorists operating on its soil, that we had given Pakistan several opportunities to take action on its own before we decided that we preemptively had to take action on our own. All of this is important to international law. International law, obviously, that the Navy is very familiar with because you sail in international waters all the time. It's important, again, that politicians be very careful about how they word statements on this particular strike. Is that not true?
Sorry, Veg, Faye, I'm sorry that my
yes.
Audio is very blurred. I missed the last part, please. Could you kindly repeat the last part?
Will these political statements hurt our chances, hurt our justification, hurt our use of international law with having to do with these strikes?
Yes. The Navy, unlike the Army and the Air Force, always operates in international waters. Now, we are getting into a very tense situation where it is a sort of war situation developing, and events as they are unfolding indicate that both sides are on a very high state of alert. Rules of engagement do apply, particularly on the high seas, because the navies operate in international waters where other navies are present. This is an international arena. So we have very specific rules of engagement, and particularly so as we approach a very critical phase. We are presently in a very critical phase, and I'm confident that the Indian Navy, having gone through this particular drill during Kargil, is well aware of what the rules of engagement are in such a situation. If during this highly tense situation are combatant units, which are on a very high state of alert and well deployed, do encounter certain hostile action at sea, they know how to respond. The rules of engagement are very clear-cut in navies. This has to be so because navies always operate internationally. Besides that, navies have a very professional understanding amongst themselves. Pakistan Navy would know that. During the Kargil War, when the Indian Navy had deployed in strength with both fleets deployed for action, when the situation was hotting up at Tololing and Tiger Hill, an uncoded message from Islamabad headquarters came, which was intercepted by us, to the Pakistan Navy: remain in harbor. The message was self-explanatory. Navies understand the professionalism that exists between them. They have a very clear understanding of it. So I'm sure that the rules of engagement would similarly apply on land. The troops at a tactical level would take necessary action, as they always do. But if it's a strategic action, if it's a very, very major action that requires a clear-cut government directive and would have ramifications, then I'm not afraid that would require a government mandate. That is how I see it.
Air Chief Marshal Major, we have to also ask the larger question here. While we are all grateful that Abhinandan has returned onto Indian soil, the larger solution for Pakistan, for terror that we continue to face, for the fact that terror continues to breed on Pakistan soil, do you believe that there is a solution right now that India can explore?
Faye, before I come to that question you asked, I need to clarify a few points.
Please do.
I think in this debate what we've done is we've digressed a bit. You know, rules of engagement and, international laws, etc. were framed for the classical hot war situations. Today, this is a war on terrorism. And I slightly differ from the Admiral that the action carried out on 26 February was a tactical action which perhaps resulted in a strategic effect, which any air power application always does. And therefore, rules of engagement in a fight against terrorism, what happened a couple of days back, and what happened even before that in the cross-border strike by the army in 2016, are not really war-mandated actions, and therefore there are many gray areas in this field. That is what I wish to clarify before I answer your question about putting an end to terrorism. Now, that is not only a military task, but a whole of government task to assess the situation in Kashmir, to assess the situation across the borders, and to factor in diplomatic and economic pressures on Pakistan for curtailing terrorism. While the military would play a big role because, if you go back in history, all the armed forces were structured for hot war situations. They were structured, trained, equipped for a hot war. But the conflicts having mutated from total war to what we have today, less than war situations, hybrid warfare, etc., have changed the rules of engagement as far as the armed forces are concerned. And it is very, very difficult to lay down specific rules because there are faceless enemies, there are no borders in between. You're fighting a terrorist and not an enemy army or armed force. This needs to be understood very clearly in the present situation.
But a quick question then, Air Chief Marshal, if you say that the rules of engagement are only for hot war situations, what does international law then say about India going into Pakistan territorial sovereign airspace when we're not at war? We're technically not at war at this point. War on terror is not hot war as you describe it.
Absolutely. This was an action, a tactical action taken against terror. We didn't target a military target. We didn't target civilians. We targeted a terrorist camp. And have you heard anybody in the world say a word about it? Has the United Nations said anything about it? And they won't, because you haven't carried out a military action across the border. You carried out an anti-terror operation. Somewhat like what America did in Pakistan to assassinate Osama bin Laden.
Well, would either of the other gentlemen want to respond to that before we move to our next question? General Malik, do you want to respond to how we ought to deal with this from a point of view of international law and strategy?
Look, strategically, I think everyone is clear that this was an action in self-defense. We had been hit and hit badly in Pulwama, and we had clear information that the terrorists who had caused that mayhem in Pulwama, where they were located. So whatever action, somebody can call it tactical, I would like to call it strategic, action that was done, it was in self-defense, and that is one reason why everyone in the world is supportive of what we did. And I think that must be quite clear. The rules of engagement may be quite vague in hybrid war, and we are fighting a hybrid war with Pakistan. But as far as this particular action is concerned, it was preemptive and it was in self-defense, because we do not want any more suicide-trained people by the Hizbul, by Jaish-e-Mohammed to enter India and then cause another mayhem like Pulwama.
Admiral Kumar, would you like to add to that?
Yes, Priya. Basically, I would like to just add that rules of engagement are designed to ensure that escalation is controlled. You cannot carry out an act of war and then expect no escalation. So that is why rules of engagement are prescribed. And I generally agree with Faye Malik, because we were there during Kargil and we knew how it went up step by step. Here it is a different situation. Kargil was it was a limited war. We actually went into a limited war. So we had different phases of rules of engagement. Here we are going straight into battle situation. As Faye Malik very correctly put it, it was in self-defense. And you used your armed forces. Armed forces are meant for war. We are trained for war. But you can use them in self-defense also in a cold start. Fallout of Pulwama led to that. And therefore, I believe that rules of engagement are important to consider. We can't just ignore them. And the decision to strike at Balikot was, as General Malik also agrees with me, a strategic decision. It was just not an ad hoc tactical move. It was well thought out, well conceived, marvelously executed by the Air Force. Full marks to the Air Force for doing a brilliant job. But it has its own repercussions, because it was across the border, deep inside Pakistan. It was like an Israeli massive strike. So that is the way I look at it. rules of engagement are basically meant to control escalation. Thank you.
Air Chief Marshal, I see you shaking your head. Do you not agree? Go ahead, please.
With great respect to Admiral Sushil Kumar, I do not, because I still insist that this is not a war-like situation. This is a fight against terrorism. This is happening all around the world. And no country has declared war on any other country. And therefore, a one-off strike like this is a strong message to a country which harbors terrorism and terrorist safe havens, that stop it or we'll hit you again. We won't hit you, your people, we won't hit your armed forces, but we'll hit a terrorist infrastructure or terrorists themselves, because we find that this is ruining our state of affairs in our country. And I think that, there are, as I said, lots of gray areas in this. Nobody in the world today, I promise you, will clearly define rules of engagements, etc., in situations such as what obtained today in our neighborhood and also in our immediate neighborhood, as well as extended neighborhood in many aspects. Because, as I said, and as the General and the Admiral said, that armed forces basically were structured, trained, and fight classical wars. But they had to evolve over the past couple of decades to even handle anti-terror operations. And when you handle an anti-terror, and what is happening is most of these are handling, I beg your pardon, are being addressed in POJ&K, as we call it now. Now, at one time we say that POK belongs to us, so we can do whatever on earth we want in that area. And that is not war. That is an insurgency or a terrorism-like situation, a less-than-war situation, a hybrid war, whatever you want to call it, which you are handling tactically and in windows of opportunity.
Well, here's my, and I just want to place this before the panel one more time. Admiral Kumar, reprisal under international law, which allows countries the one-time opportunity to take action in sovereign space or territory of another country, does that apply in this case? And the reason why I'm bringing it up is because what politicians are saying today will jeopardize the stand that the Ministry of External Affairs has taken so carefully.
I'd like to digress a bit here and mention and go back to the Parliament attack of 2001, December 13th. I was then the chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee when it happened. Not many know that the military chiefs, General Padmanabhan, Air Chief Marshal Tipnis, and I met with Rajesh Mishra, the NSA, and Defense Minister George Fernandes in the Army Operations Room. And the first thought that occurred to us was a riposte. And the target chosen was deep inside the LOC, across the LOC. It was not inside Pakistan, as was the Balikot operation. But that could not be conducted because an intel input last minute indicated that that proposed target, which was a training camp for terrorists, had been mischievously shifted just before the Parliament attack and located between a hospital and a school. So Prime Minister Vajpayee did not agree because there would have been massive collateral damage. The next thing that happened was The Cabinet Committee on Security met and decided that we would mobilize for operations. So from a situation where the parliament attack took place, within a few hours, orders were issued for Operation Parakaram. As we look at it in hindsight, that was not the finest hour for the military, because it cost us bitterly. It was a mandate given to the armed forces to mobilize without a clear-cut directive, without any clear-cut strategic aim in mind. It was, as the government thought, would be coercive diplomacy in a muscular fashion. But unfortunately, almost a year went past with the armed forces mobilized. Sadly, I think it may not have achieved its aim. So you see, these are situations which we need to ponder over. History has a lot to tell us about how we are handling terrorism. That was a brazen daylight terrorist attack on the Indian Parliament, on our own soil, and we knew it came from across the border, because terror is in the psyche, the political psyche of Pakistan. More than that, their military, the army, which controls the deep state in Pakistan, calls the shots. And therefore we have to be clear in our mind that they are the ones who are wanting to avenge the humiliation of the 1971 war they received at the Indian Armed Forces. So we've got to keep all this in mind when we look at the further course of action. This could escalate because we are faced with a bunch of crazy generals across the border. We mustn't forget that. They activated the Tela Rangers during the Kargil war. General Malik knows this. Vajpayee deftly handled the situation and called the bluff of those generals. I'm sure even the present government has called the bluff of their nuclear threats from across the border. So one has to even praise the present government for the action it has taken. Very decisive. That's the way how I look at this overall situation today.
General Malik, during the Kargil operation, during Operation Vijay, the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee decided that our Air Force will not cross the line of control and will stay on our side of the line of control. Do you believe that this government's decision to allow an airstrike, and we've never allowed an airstrike of this kind in the past, or to commission an airstrike of this kind, is in credit to this government?
Yes, I think so. You know, I must tell you that during Kargil war, we had at one time asked the CCS, the Cabinet Committee on Security, to allow the Air Force to cross the line of control to be able to engage the enemy targets better. But we were told, no, you cannot do that. So we had to follow that. I believe that the present action that has been taken by the government to go across and strike the terrorist camp is definitely not only taking greater risk, but also shows the boldness, the determination of our government. You know, Faye, you asked earlier, you asked a question, very relevant and very important question. How do we proceed further after what all has happened till now and Wing Commander Abhinandan has come back. Let me give you my own impression on the whole thing, that getting these organizations, Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba, or their leaders banned or imprisoned, or banking entirely on diplomatic channels, asking the United Nations Security Council and other friends to take action against Pakistan, is not going to end the proxy war that has been going on by the deep state for such a long time. We have to fight our own battle against these people, because this is for them a cheap way of undermining our stability in our country. So as far as I'm concerned, I foresee a sustained operation of the kind that we have carried out so far, greater determination, greater resilience, and being prepared to strike not once, but maybe again and again the Pakistani targets. We have to ultimately bend the Pakistani deep state, the army, into believing that we are going to cause greater harm to them and their countrymen, and then they have been doing it. So it is a sustained operation, and it requires a greater amount of determination, resoluteness, and honing all the instruments that are available with the government, the diplomatic side, the economic squeeze, and of course the armed forces whenever they are required to carry out action. So it's a long drawn affair, and we have to be prepared for this.
Right. Quickly taking the question also to Admiral Kumar, do you agree that we would need a sustained operation and multiple strikes of the kind we saw last week?
I entirely agree with General Ved Malik, Faye. This calls for extreme resilience. We have to brace ourselves. The whole nation has to brace itself, because terrorism, with the army, its handmaiden, the ISI, and its strange bedfellows, the Jaish and the Lashkar and others, and their hydra-headed monsters, they would have to be kept under control. This is a war on terror.
Yes.
And we have to brace ourselves for considerable time to come, because now that we have started it, and very correctly so, we have taken the bull by the horns, and we must not give up the operation now. Must be on full alert, must carry on. This is a well-started operation, well done, and it must carry on. We must brace ourselves for it.
Chief Marshal Major, I have a different question for you, and I want to introduce this to the panel right now. There's a careful balance between politician, bureaucrat, and the forces. And gentlemen like yourselves, in the positions where you're making decisions within that balance for your teams and for the men who serve in your teams, the question of budgets, equipment, acquisition, files that perhaps bureaucrats are not moving as fast enough, that I do realize becomes frustrating for all the politicians right now who are taking credit for work done by the forces. Would you rather they pay closer attention to moving those files and pushing decisions that may be good for the forces instead?
Faye, that's every uniformed man and woman's dream, that files move fast and you get what you need faster. But having said that, I look at it in a broader perspective. If you were to look at any armed force in the world, all armed forces, modernization, sustenance, their equipment, their manning, always happens in stages. It doesn't happen the way we in uniform want it to happen. And there is a reason for that. Because everything that happens in the armed forces also depends on the cost to the nation. But having said that, what is very, very essential and required in our context is that there has to be a more proactive approach from the support agencies working for the armed forces or supervising the armed forces from the defense ministry. And there needs to be a greater coordination between the armed forces and the Ministry of Defense. There have been many papers written on how well to bring this about, but very little has happened on ground. And I do hope that this government pays a little more attention to that so that your acquisitions, your retirement benefits, everything that happens in the armed forces gets a fillip and moves faster than what it is at presently. But certainly.
General Malik, your comments as well on the politician-bureaucrat balance with the armed forces. And also, while the three of you represent our armed forces, there's the paramilitary that has a completely different battle right now for pension and health insurance and more basic things that they're not receiving. Your view on how you'd want politicians right now who are taking credit to put more effort into those matters?
Faye, I think I'll take your question in three parts. The first part is regarding the modernization of the forces as well as adequacy of weapons and equipment that the three services need. Generally, we have a formula of 30% equipment which is comparatively old, vintage, another 30% equipment which is has seen good days, but it is not state-of-the-art. I would say call it mature equipment. And the 30% is state-of-the-art. Now, we have to retain a balance of these three types of equipment and weapons that we have got. There is also the problem of inadequacy, and for a sustained action and for capability of deterrence, we require adequate weapon systems and equipment under these three categories. That is the first part for which, as Air Chief Marshal Major has said, we need that files should move much faster than they have been doing till now. The second part is regarding the civil-military divide. Absolutely, it is something which people have been demanding because we feel that in today's environment, strategic environment, you need much closer interaction between the political authority and the military leaders. You also need more frequent consultation so that they can keep each other informed of what may happen in a short time. The war or the conflict situation move very fast these days. And thirdly, I believe it is also economical, and it will create the right kind of synergy that is required, the jointmanship, as well as taking help of all other ministries in time, so that civil-military relations can be improved. Only we have an integrated Ministry of Defense, and we are not dependent only on talking to the political authority through the bureaucrats. That needs to be sorted out. And that we have been demanding for a long time, including the requirement of a CDS, because once you have that, things probably we all feel that things will move much faster. So there is a problem in civil-military relations which should be improved. And the third part you said regarding the paramilitary forces. Look, there is no doubt that they are engaged heavily in our internal security duties. They require good equipment, they require good training, they require good leaders, and of course, we have to look after their welfare and morale. So whatever is their demand in terms of pension or in terms of that must be looked at sympathetically by the government of India. I'm not trying to compare them with I think it is not a correct thing to do. But keeping these aspects in mind, we must look after their, as I said, training, their morale, their service conditions, etc.
Absolutely. Admiral Kumar, I have been told by several people that you are not an officer to pull your punches. You like to tell it as it is. There are currently several cases of litigation on in courts, in Supreme Courts and High Courts, where the government themselves are fighting their own officers. Questions like NFFU, for example, or other appeals of pension, appeals of compensation, where the government-commissioned lawyers are fighting against retired officers. Also, if I were to read out from the Standing Committee on Defense, it says very clearly that the budgetary allocations barely account for inflation and does not even cater to the GST that the armed forces have to pay when they acquire various things, that they're falling short. The budget leaves us with no choice to either reprioritize, to reduce our requirement as far as security is concerned, or to go slow on acquisition. Is there a message you want to send to the politicians today about what the forces really need?
Well, Faye, my co-panelists, Air Chief Marshal Fali Major and General Malik, have very concisely explained what our shortfall and inadequacies are militarily in equipment. But I would like to just sum up this with one simple quotation from a very well-known poet, Rudyard Kipling, who mentioned, sadly, in times of war and not before, God and soldier we all adore. But when war is over and all things righted, God is forgotten and the soldier slighted. That is the sad truth. And the military understands this the best. Today, it is all about fighting terror. And it is the military that has to face the flag. Hopefully, the political masters and the bureaucracy would remember this moment. They must not forget what we have passed through. Thank you.
Said, one quick question I will smuggle in. Air Chief Marshal, we lost 40 Jawans 40 officers at Pulwama, and that was heavily written about and talked about. But we've lost 20 others from the paramilitary and the military since then in encounters and in other activities at the border, including one Mi-17 helicopter that went down with 5 Air Force officers on it. You commanded the Mi-17s at various points in your career. These accidents that take the lives of our Air Force officers, are they avoidable? Should we be able to do better bureaucratically to avoid these accidents in terms of equipment, in terms of being able to give our officers the very best?
Absolutely, Faye. I mean, unfortunately, the month of February has been very bad for the Air Force as far as accidents were concerned. But in this business of military aviation, accidents do take place, sometimes at the wrong time, or they pile up very close to each other. That's a different issue. But coming to the main issue of equipment and the quality of aeroplanes, and what we need to do. Most certainly, you see, the aerospace today revolves around technology. And technology infusion in the aerospace sector, especially military aviation, is extremely important. And, so far, well, like General Malik had very clearly brought out as to what should be our technology levels in the armed forces, 30, 30, 40, it's today a pipe dream as far as we are concerned. Because we don't have the basic defense industrial base available in our country, the kind we should have to remain self-sustained in all our military and hardware and software. That is the unfortunate part, because we depend a large, almost 60-70% of our equipment is imported. Until such time we bring that down, which will facilitate cost to the nations to improve, it's going to be very, very tough to maintain this technology levels, what we just spoke about. But having said that, there are ways and means to do this, to improve the, it's just not the machine. It's even the man who counts a hell of a lot. Because after all, you may get the finest technology in the world, it's converted into a capability by humans. And therefore, it's a continuous process of men, machines, and technology infusion at a rate to keep up with your likely adversaries and to keep up with how well they are equipping themselves. Now, that is an issue which needs to be discussed, not in this debate, but in perhaps 10 other debates to come to some conclusion.
Well, that's very well said, and unfortunately we've run out of time. Gentlemen, this has been a complete honor to spend an hour with the three of you having this conversation, and I'm sure my audience has appreciated your time just as much as I have. Thank you for being so generous with your time this evening. And I do promise that we will have more conversations about NFFU, conversations about equipment, about budgets, about what the forces really need to help the larger part of India understand what soldiers actually go through. On that note, if you have questions, feel free to get in touch with us here on Mirror Now, and we'll bring your questions forward. The idea, obviously, along with the fact that we bring you information, is to be able to help us all understand the compulsions and the situations and the conditions under which our officers and our forces are currently working. Thanks for watching.